Okay, I think we had a little problem there. Hold on 1 second. There was an error message. So the fiery aspects are masculine. The feminine aspects are contractive, more watery. We have to learn how to balance the fiery aspects of our personality or the expressions of our personality with the watery, cool, introverted, contemplative aspects of our personality. If we don't balance those out and all the various temperaments in between, then we engage in self-destructive behavior. We have reactions and engage in activities and reactions that are actually self-destructive, create disorder in society, amongst the community, in relationships, which lead to self-destructive patterns of behavior, and later on, even just the manifestation of that self-destruction is the way the society doesn't function well in our communities because of the way we treat one another, the way we interact with one another, and so forth. So we not only focus on the balance of male and female in creation, the balance of male and female within our own bodies, the balance of male and female within our own emotional output, our emotional expressions, our mental expressions. We have to understand that there's a balance and work to achieve that balance. There's a balance of expansion and contraction, night and day, death and birth. It's not death and life. There's birth. We're born. We live in the world. We go through the gate of death. We live in the spirit world. We're born or reincarnated, return to the physical world. So birth and death are the two gates that are the complementary opposites of one another. Life is continuous. So there's birth and death. There's male and female, meaning Afurakani male, Afurakani female. There's night and day. There's hot and cold. And then most critically, there is order, and then there is non-order. The balance of order is non-order. So we often use the analogy of if you had some clay that was unformed, it's in a non-ordered state. If you form it into a sculpture, then it's in an ordered state. It went from non-order to order. That was a balanced transition, non-order to order. Now, if it's in a sculpture and the sculptor decided to collapse it and send it back to its unformed state and make another creation, then that's fine. It went again from non-order to order. If it's ordered into a sculpture and then somebody else comes along and breaks up the sculpture and scatters the pieces all over the floor, that's not the balance of non-order, that's disorder. That's a perversion of the already created order. That's not part of the balance of creation. The balance of creation is non-order to order, or unformed to formed. It's not once you have the naturally formed object, then somebody perverts the form. That's disorder, and disorder must be eradicated. So there's no balance between good and evil. In our culture, in the true sense, in real cosmology, good and order is the same thing. There's an Akhan proverb that says, the hawk says that everything that they created is good, meaning everything that they created is in order. It's a manifestation of order. Anything that was exists in the created universe that was sanctioned by Inyame is always an ordered entity. Now somebody can come along and destroy something that was already ordered, but that's a perversion of the order. It is not the balance of the order. That is critical to understand, because when we recognize the first principle value is recognizing the divine order of creation, the balance of male and female, then we need to understand that when we're talking about order, or that which is unformed and that which is formed, that which is not yet created and that which is created, the only entities in the human sphere that were created are Afurakani people. Once we were created by Ra and Ra'et, by Nyonkumpon and Nyonkunton, there was no more creation of human beings. That was the beginning and end of the creation of human beings. We are the only created humans in the creation. And then we began to reproduce. A few thousand years ago, after millions of years of existence, a few thousand years ago, a small percentage of our people separated because of their own spiritual degeneration, were forced out from the larger population based on their perverse activities, those were the ones who were drawn up into northern Eurasia. Those are the ones who became depigmented, lost their melanin, their pigmentation, extra vitiligo characteristics, albinism characteristics, developing white skin, blonde hair, light eyes through that autoimmune disease and genetic mutation, and they have passed that on physiologically as well as a spiritual degeneration for thousands of years. That they are not a created entity. They engaged in self-destructive behavior and were forced out of the community, and they continue to proliferate. No different than cancerous cells developing within the body. If you're subject to radiation or some chemicals that are not harmonious with your physiology, and then some of your cells become deformed and disfigured, and they become cancerous, and then they attempt to proliferate and consume and destroy other cells in the body. They become cancerous, disfigured, and malfunctioning. They are not part of the created order. That's not a naturally occurring cell. That's a perversion of the created order. And the response to that, of course, is your immune system isolates those cells, destroys them, and then expels them from the body. It's no different than the whites and their offspring. They are not created entities with a capital C. They didn't come into being through divine fiat or divine sanction. They're a perversion of the created order, a perversion of their cancerous cells within the body of black humanity based on their own behavior, their self-destructive, perverse, disordered behavior, that spiritual perversity manifested as a physical degeneration, them losing their melanin content once they migrated away, and some before they migrated away. And now this perverse entity, this cancerous group, exists, but they were not created. They exist, but they were not fashioned by the Supreme Being any more than certain cells that became cancerous because somebody was dealing with radiation. Those cells were not created in your body as cancerous cells. That only happened because of a perverse act or perverse energy interfering. In this sense, whites and their offspring, or those who became the whites and their offspring, that was a conscious decision on their own to engage in that kind of behavior. And anybody who engages in certain kinds of behavior, whether it's dissexuality, homosexuality, pedophilia, rape, incest, murder, all kinds of perverse activities, we typically would kill those individuals, or if they were able to escape, they would be exiled from the community. Those who were consciously engaged in those kinds of activities are those who will now become the whites and their offspring. They're not part of the balance of humanity. The balance of the Afurakani male is the Afurakani female. The balance of the Afurakani female is the Afurakani male. Complementary opposites balance one another in harmony. The opposite of Afurakani people, meaning the created people, are the uncreated people, the people who are not yet in the world, meaning the ancestresses and ancestors. That is our balance. White people are not the balance of black people. White people are minute perversion of the created group, and they are no longer the same. Just like the cancerous cells, once they become disfigured, they are no longer the same as the healthy cells. In fact, they don't look the same, they're not designed the same, they don't function the same. In fact, all they do is malfunction to consume and destroy the other cells if their development is not arrested. So the balance is not only the male and female, Amen and Amenet, Kolotiolo and Katieleo in Senufo tradition, Chukwu and Komosu in the Igbo tradition, Olorun, Olokun in the Yoruba tradition, Lisa and Mawu in the Vodun tradition. All Afurakani cultures understand the balance of male and female, starting from the Supreme Being, with the deities, the goddesses and the gods, the creator and the creatress, the ancestresses and the ancestors. It's not just the creator, the gods, and the ancestors. It's the Supreme Being, the Great Mother and the Great Father, the creator and the creatress, the goddesses and the gods, the ancestresses and the ancestors. You have to always include the balance of male and female. If you don't understand that, then you're operating in imbalance, and that leads to imbalanced perceptions and imbalanced behavior, self-destructive behavior, and we see the result of that every day in our communities, and we're in the process of rectifying all of that. So, but it's not just dealing with the forces in nature and us physiologically, also emotionally. We talked about that, the fiery emotions, the watery emotions, and so forth. But then we also have to understand, as a people, as a group, who is our balance. And it is not the whites and their offspring. Disorder is not the balance of order. Disorder is the perversion of order. The whites and their offspring are a perversion of a small group who disassociated themselves and were forced out from us. They are a perversion of the created order. Our balance is the ancestresses and ancestors, the Nananom Nsamanfo, the Aku, the Akutu, the Agungun, and so forth, the Kuvito, and so forth. Okay, so that's key to that part. We're going to go to the next principle. If you have any questions, anybody have any questions on that? Okay, so that first principle, which was the first chapter, of course, recognizing the divine, the divine order of creation, the balance of male and female. The second principle value of Afurakani Obarima is establish that balance in every aspect of your life. So to be an Afurakani Obarima, or man, first you must recognize the balance of male and female so that you can be balanced in your thoughts, intentions, and actions from the beginning. And throughout every thought, every intention, and action, we're dealing with balance. Now you must establish that balance in every aspect of your life. Now, physiologically, you have to establish balance. You need to consume food, but then you also need to eliminate food and balance. You need to take in nutrients. You need to utilize those nutrients, process them, but then you also need to eliminate toxins. If you just take in a great deal of food and you're not eliminating toxins, that leads to imbalance, that leads to disease. You're expanding, but you're not contracting properly. So balance even deals with you physiologically. That deals with diet, looking at proper notions of diet, and we can go into that, and we have articles on that on the website. But how do we approach diet physiologically so we can establish balance and maintain balance? We also deal with, hold on one second, I think I see a, okay, so the first piece we're talking about, we're dealing with physiological balance. That's one piece. We also talk about emotional balance. But even before we get to emotional balance, another part of physiological balance, even though it's not physiological, but it's still dealing with activity, is we talked about diet, but also you have to engage in work, but then you have to engage in recreation or rest in balance. If you don't engage in work properly, we mentioned in the book there's an Akhan saying, Ajuma Ye. That's what the Akhan say. It means work is good, work is necessary, work is good, work is actually sacred, it's divine. Your heart is never not working. Your immune system is never taking a day off. It's always functioning. If it did not engage in the work that it was designed to engage in, then you would not function properly, you would not be alive. So work is good, work is sacred, work is harmonious, it's supportive of divine order. So we have to engage in work, but we also have to engage in harmonious recreation. You can't overwork yourself, that creates stress, that creates disease. However, you cannot be not working and just be lazy, because that leads to a perversion of perception. Laziness leads to a perversion of the mind. It leads to that idleness of the mind, leads to self-destructive activity, because then you become weak. Your immune system is compromised. Spiritually, you're compromised. And then you can, just like physically, if you don't get enough nutrients, your immunity is compromised, and toxins, bacteria that normally you would just reject without effort, now they can attack your system and take you down. Spiritually, if you become weak because you're not engaged in the kind of activity that you were designed to execute in the world, and you just neglect all of that, you lower your spiritual immunity, and now you can be influenced negatively by discarnate spirits, as well as of discarnate relatives, as well as the negative projections of people around you, people in the community, people in your family, people who are unrelated to you but you're in constant contact with. You'll be overwhelmed by their projections, their mindset, their desires, their magnetism. It can negatively influence you because you don't have the kind of strength, and you haven't been fortified enough because you're not engaging in a proper work and rest cycle in order to stimulate yourself. And then if your diet is not proper, then that compromises your physical and spiritual immunity as well. So that diet, as well as that activity, we're establishing balance, expansion, and contraction. Taking in nutrients, eliminating toxins, engaging and expending energy in a harmonious fashion based on what your function in the world is, engaging in activity that's supportive of the function you came into the world to execute, whether you were to be an engineer, a builder, a healer, or whatever it's supposed to be, engaging in proper activity, but then also replenishing yourself through proper sleep, recreation, and so forth. That's an expansion and contraction, complementary opposites, balance, need to maintain that. Emotional balance. Understanding our culture, some people will say, well, I'm only human and this is why I snap and act a fool sometimes and engage in immature behavior because that's just what humans do. Children scream, and we mentioned this in the book, children scream, children cry, they lash out, they throw things when they don't get their way. And when we're teaching our children, even if they're 2 years old, 3 years old, and so forth, we admonish them for that. We try to stamp out that behavior early on. When you become an adult and you scream, cry, lash out, throw things, engage in foolish rationalizations and foolish behavior because things are not going your way, it's not because you're being human, it's because you're being a child, you're being immature. From the Afurakani perspective, you're acting as a child. That's not normal behavior. That's not natural behavior. That's foolish, immature, ignorant behavior, and that's not part of our culture. That's not normal. So balancing your emotional output, those fiery emotions, so that that fiery energy, when it manifests itself cyclically in a normal cycle, you utilize that fiery energy to engage in activity that's building, that's expressive, that's moving the Oman, the nation, meaning the Afurakani nation forward, and so forth, defending the nation. And then when you have those watery, cool, introspective emotions, emotional expressions, you're studying, developing, being intuitive, learning, internalizing everything you need so that once it's time to engage in that expressive activity, you can do so in a harmonious fashion. You have a plan and so forth. So that we need to engage in that kind of activity. Those emotional expressions, balancing out the fiery, the watery, the earth, the air, and the various temperaments within, that's part of establishing the balance in every aspect of your life. That's part of being an Afurakani Obarima. Now, when you engage in that kind of activity, physiologically, you're balancing yourself out through diet, through work, and rest in a balanced fashion. Your emotional output, the way you think and study and apply certain things to every aspect of your life. Now you've balanced yourself on a fundamental level. Then you can connect with other people who have balanced themselves on such a fundamental level. And now you can engage in what we call Amaruka, or the nation building or nation restoration process. So in Afurakani Obarima, after understanding that principal value of establishing that balance, the divine order, which is the balance of male and female, the second principal value is establish that order and balance in every aspect of your life. Now that you engage that process physiologically, emotionally, and spiritually, now you recognize just intuitively, once you attain that balance, that it's unnatural for an Afurakani person, Afurakani people to live under the rule of the whites and their offspring. That's unnatural. We recognize that now. Our consciousness is clear because we have balanced ourselves. We recognize the divine balance, that divine order, and then we established it in every aspect of our lives. Now we're open, we're clear, and we recognize that even though we may have established it in our physical bodies and within our activities and within our emotional state and spiritually, mentally, now we recognize socially that we're out of balance. Prior to that, if we were still conditioned, we would think, well, there's no problem. As long as I'm eating right, getting enough sleep, and going to work, then I'm living a good life. But if you're clear mentally, you may have established balance on those levels, but then you recognize, number one, that you're not isolated, you're part of a system. You can feel the connection between other Afurakani people. And you recognize that as a group, collectively, we are imbalanced in the sense that we are still living under the rule of our enemies, of the whites and their offspring, the spirits of disorder. So once you get to that point, then you begin to not only you've already established the balance in your individual life, now it needs to be established collectively. And that collectivity with regard to balance is Amaruka, which is nation building, restoration. So there are 7 major principles of nation building, 7 nation building activities or a catalog of activities based on the abosom that govern the 7 days of the week, that govern that chronobiological circaseptan rhythm that govern our community. So, of course, the first principle, and we mentioned this in the book as well, methods of food production and preservation. You cannot establish a nation and not be able to feed yourself and preserve food. So you have to be able to produce food production, and preservation. Next, you need a system of curing the people. You can't have a nation, establish your own nation on your own land. You can feed yourself, you can produce food, you can preserve food for situations where weather destroys crops, but you preserve food so you can sustain the nation. But then if somebody catches a cold or they develop a very rudimentary illness, it wipes everybody out because you can't cure anybody. You have to have a system of curing disease. Next, you have to have a military structure to defend the nation. You can feed yourself, you can cure yourself, but we understand that when we develop a nation, acquire land and build a nation, the spirits of disorder, the whites and their offspring, will attempt to attack, destroy, and take the nation down. No matter what, we understand that's going to happen because we understand their nature. So what we do is we must establish a military structure for defense of the nation. That's the third piece. Next, you have to understand we must institutionalize our values. That's through building institutions, not just buildings, but systems of teaching food preservation and cultivation. A system of instructing people in the curing of disease, natural medicine, surgery, bone setting, and various other things. An institution to teach security, defense, chemical and biological warfare, which will be the number one means by which we can wage war against the enemy, since we don't have tanks and bombs and so forth, but we don't need that in reality because chemical and biological warfare is more direct and more pervasive with regard to, is how deadly it can be. So when we need to protect ourselves, we need to use nature and everything we can, and we're going to get into that. So institutions that teach these various things, as well as cultural institutions that institutionalize our values. If the people in the nation don't recognize why a nation is important, and why the components of a nation is important, why we are together, why we are who the whites and their offspring are, what our true story is, we don't institutionalize our values for every single man, woman, and child in the nation to understand the value of the nation, then the nation will collapse. These are the people who will start to try to bring the whites and their offspring into the nation after we've established an independent nation. They'll try to bring dissexuality, pedophilia, and everything that's part of white culture into a nation if we don't institutionalize our values. That is part of Nanasom ancestral religion, Amamre culture, and so forth. We ritually institutionalize values through ritual practice, through holidays, through various other things for us to realign ourselves with our function in the universe through our Okraa, through our soul, and institutionalize that realignment through ritual practices such as holidays and so forth. So you must have institutions to institutionalize your values, not just skills like engineering and design and computer science and things like that, and healing and medicine and so forth, but also institutionalizing values, which is key. You also have to have a system of governance and jurisprudence. You can't have a nation where you can feed yourself, you can cure yourself, you can defend yourself. Everybody understands the value of the nation. We have holidays and ritual practices as well as institutions that teach every component of nation building that allows us to continue as a nation. But then if you can't govern yourself and you don't have sound systems of governance and jurisprudence, then once there's a small altercation between certain people within the nation, then that can turn into a civil war and the nation collapses internally because there wasn't a system of governance to mitigate disputes and redress people's grievances. So you have to have a system of governance and jurisprudence. And as you think about these different pieces, you'll see that the first piece, food production and preservation, is connected to the abosom of the sun. Curing disease is connected to the abosom of the moon, which is Adjua, which is all said in ancient Kemet. System of defense and security, the abosom operating through the planet Bena and Abena, which is Heru Behudet and Sekhmet, or Bena and Abena, Ogun and Iyami Abeni. The institutionalization of values, teaching and so forth is Awuku and Akua, Kwekwa Nansi, Akua, or Eshu and Agberu, and so forth. The system of governance and jurisprudence is Yao, Ya, and Aba, which is Heru, Wachet, and Nekabet, dealing with governance, divine rulership, sovereignty, and so forth, independence. You get to the next piece, we have to have a means by which we can build homes on acquired land. So we have to acquire land, and of course we have to build homes, shelter on that acquired land. And then of course the last piece is we have to be able to clothe ourselves, we have to deal with textiles, and so forth. So those 7 principles of nation building, Ama-Insesio, nation restoration, even those 7 are connected to the abosom that govern the 7 days of the week, the circumception cycle, and so forth. When you have established the balance in every aspect of your life, starting physically, spiritually, emotionally, then when you get to the collective aspect, that's when you move into Ama-Insesio, nation building. You'll be drawn to one or more aspects of the 7 principles of nation building, more so than others based on your energy configuration, your energy complex, and what function you came to the world to execute. But everybody has a role to play. Some people will be more so drawn to defense, some people will be more so drawn to governance and jurisprudence, some people will be more so drawn to agricultural sciences, some people will be drawn more so to medicine, some people will be drawn more so to institutionalizing values, including establishing engineering consortiums and things like that. Some people will be more drawn to textiles, some people will be drawn more so to building homes and things like that. So depending on your energy configuration, you will be connected to one or more of those aspects of nation building. So that's part of the process of that second principle value. The first value, recognizing the divine order of creation, the balance of male and female order, is the first principle. The second principle is balance. Establish that balance in every aspect of your existence, and we just went through that piece. The third principle value of an Afurakani Obarima, Akode, which is our Akhan term for arms. Now you arm yourself to defend that balance with your life. So first, you recognize the balance of male and female. That is the divine order of creation. That allows you to attune to your own stability, your own balance, spiritually, mentally, and so forth. Once you're focused on that balance, then you establish that balance in every aspect of your existence. If you're not seeking to establish that balance in every aspect of your existence, you are not functioning as an Obarima, you're functioning as a child. You engage in self-destructive, imbalanced behavior and thoughts, intentions, and actions. But when you engage that process and begin to establish that balance in every aspect of your existence, now you're functioning as an Afurakani Obarima. Now once you do that, you must defend that balance with your life. You must arm yourself to defend that balance with your life. And when the majority of Afurakani Obarima or Mberima are arming ourselves to defend the order and balance with our lives, that's of course a security, military type structure. We need to understand, and we go into some detail in chapter 3 of the book, that section 3, talking about akode, or arms, meaning armaments, artillery. We have to protect, defend ourselves. That's defense and offense. We are engaged in a war. We have been born into a war zone. We have been in a protracted war with the whites and their offspring for over 12,000 years. That war will not stop until we make them extinct. Until we exterminate the whites and their offspring, the war will not stop. As we are standing here right now, they are waging chemical and biological warfare against us 24/7. They do that through cigarettes, for example. Every year, about 47,000 black people die from smoking-related cancers. We mentioned in the book that by the 5-year mark, there were about 5,000 people from America who died in the so-called Iraq War. That's about 5,000 people in 5 years. Within 1 year, there are about 47,000 black people who die from smoking-related cancers. In 10 years, 470,000, nearly 500,000. When they talk about the enslavement of our people, they will say that there are about 500,000 black people who were brought to North America during the enslavement of our people over the course of about 350 plus years. In reality, it was more than that. It was about 5 million. But there are more than 500,000 of our people dying every decade just from smoking-related cancers, that the whites and their offspring are placing these cigarettes in our communities, promoting them to young people, to people under the age of 10, conditioning us to accept these products, selling them all throughout, the community. Their goal is to murder as many of our people as possible. That's just cigarettes. We also have alcohol, crack cocaine, heroin, LSD, all kinds of drugs, PCP, all of these various agents of chemical and biological warfare. This is what it's for. It's to wipe our community out, destroy as many of our people as possible. We also have the whites and their offspring waging war on the continent, police brutality in America, which has always been the case, wholesale murder of our people. We know what happened with the Trayvon Martin case and so forth. That happens on a regular basis all throughout the year, all over the country. It's been happening ever since we have ever come in contact with the whites and their offspring, when they've gotten the upper hand over the past 100 plus years. Now, for thousands of years, the whites and their offspring have invaded Afuraka. They have attacked our people. Typically, we have crushed the whites and their offspring. We have waged war, won wars against them, sent them scattering. For thousands of years, they invaded ancient Kemet. For thousands of years, we typically won the wars against the whites and their offspring. When they would wage war against ancient Kemet, they couldn't defeat us typically. Every now and then they may win some battles and take over a certain area, but for the most part, they were unsuccessful. They had to wait for us to engage in civil war, have internecine warfare, and then they will play both sides, one side against the other. For hundreds of years they engaged this process. They had to wait for a disintegration of the society from the inside, migrations away from the society, in order for them to be able to take control of the northern part of ancient Kemet. The same thing happened in West Afuraka. Some people will say, well, why did the whites and their offspring, if we were so intelligent and cultural, why were they able to enslave our people for 500 years? The whites and their offspring did not come to West Afuraka and just enslave black people. They got there in the 12,400s, which they would call the 1400s, most of those West Afurakani nations that fell to the whites and their offspring fell in the late 12,800s or the late 1800s, like the 1870s, 1880s, meaning the whites and their offspring were in West Afurakani for the before and through the entire Musuo Kesi, or the Great Perversity, the enslavement process, but they were not controlling those areas. They didn't take control, and people come under protectorates and so forth and under these European so-called powers until the late 12,800s or the late 1870s, 1880s, and so forth. And typically what would happen is they would wait for us to be engaged in civil war. Very often one black group was connected to some Muslim foolishness, waging war against another black group. Sometimes there were succession disputes. Very often there was some influence, some external influence within the black population. We're waging war against one another, and then the weaker black group would ally with the white group, and together they would fight the stronger black group to take them down. And once they were taken down, then the white group would change sides and connect with the other black group that was taken down and wage war against the other black group. So they would play us against each other, and that's what started happening in the late 12,800s. They were not just coming into the continent just taking our people. They weren't capable of doing that. They had to wait for us to wage war against one another and then capture the prisoners of war and purchase them from us and then sell them to their own people across the water, across the Atlantic. Some of our people, of course, allied with the whites and their offspring. We had traders. The vast majority of our people were not traders, of course. They would wage war against the whites and their offspring. This is why, if the whites and their offspring were powerful enough, they would have taken over in West Afurakani in the 1400s. There would have been no West Afurakani empires at all. There would have just been white control across the board for 400 years. They were not in control at all. Typically, in the vast majority of those areas, for the entire enslavement period, it wasn't until after enslavement ended that they took control. They took control because of our infighting, again in the late 1800s, and by the about 70 years later, in the 50s, beginning in the 50s, 12,950, or what they would call the 1950s, that's when, first with Sudan, they had their independence movement. After them, Ghana, 1957, and then the various countries started moving for their political independence. So within less than a century, they began to gain their political independence back. They gained political independence, but now they're working, and they should be working on their cultural and spiritual independence, because they're still colonized, many of them, culturally and spiritually. So when we talk about this war, the whites and their offspring have been waging against us for thousands of years. In ancient Kemet, they typically weren't successful for thousands of years until the very end, and that again was because of infighting amongst our own people. We migrated west, south, central. Some of us reestablished empires, ancient Ghana, ancient Mali, ancient Songhai, Kanem, Bornu, ancient Yoruba culture, Ife, Nok culture, and so forth. Various cultures, ancient Igbo culture, just across the board. We reestablished culture, and we continued for hundreds and hundreds of years. And because of infighting and some internal disputes, that's what caused an internal collapse. And then externally, the enemy was able to engage in some control techniques. However, the key point is, no matter where we are in the world, where we have been, as long as the whites and their offspring exist, they are parasites, and parasites need a host. Cancerous cells will continuously attempt to proliferate, consume, and destroy everything in their path, until the entire organism which they are consuming and destroying actually becomes destroyed, and they are destroyed along with it. The whites and their offspring are parasites. They are spiritually entities without an Okraa, without a soul, without a divine consciousness. They are disaligned from divine order. They have no connection to divine order. They are spirits of disorder. They are the cancerous cells in the body of black humanity. So they will continue to function or malfunction as they do, and we need to deal with them accordingly. So when we talk about akode, or arms, armaments, arm ourselves to defend ourselves, that's physical defense, mental, emotional, spiritual, intellectual, and so forth. We develop weaponry, we acquire weaponry, but we develop weaponry. We don't just acquire weaponry from the enemy and then try to use the weaponry that the enemy sells us to take the enemy out. We have the capacity, we have the know-how, the wherewithal to develop new weapons that have never been developed before, that will strike the target but not create disorder in the world and in our community at the same time. Chemical and biological warfare is something we've used for thousands of years. On the plantations of America, we set a precedent for that. We not only got guns and stole guns, from the fortresses and so forth, and used those guns against the whites in Arab Spring effectively, but the people who were in the kitchen, the cooks, the butlers, people in the house, they would take medicines, use them as poisons, poison the so-called slave master and his family, and then we would be able to rout them, burn down the plantations, and escape. When there were large plantation so-called uprisings or there were resistance movements like with Gabriel Prosser or Denmark Vesey, very often the people who were the spiritualists, the priests and priestesses, people who were engaged in spirituality, they would learn the medicinal use of herbs, learn how to use them as poisons. They had plotted to poison the water supply, poison the food, and so forth. When the whites and offspring found out about elaborate plans to poison the water supply and the foods, that's what caused them such fear. Those kinds of instances, as well as those successes when we waged war and freed ourselves, that they knew they had to move into the phase of abolition, because if they did not, it would catch on and we would end up wiping them out totally. So their goal was, we can no longer have enslavement in America. We have to move towards abolition or they will wipe us out because this will catch on. So now we have to move towards cultural colonization, and that's when they move towards the whole teaching us Christianity to totally corrupt and warp our minds, which we're going to get to that in the section after the next. So this is what we're talking about with regard to arms. It's physical, but it's also spiritual. Physical armaments, chemical and biological armaments, but then when they wage war against us intellectually, culturally, and so forth, we have to arm ourselves in those areas as well. Okay, any questions on that? Okay, let me get a drink of water real quick and we're going to move on. Okay, give me 1 second. Okay. All right. So let's see. Okay, it's 9:30. So we're gonna continue. We're gonna review these next few principles. The next principle value, Afurakani Obarima, continuously review or respect or review every thought, intention, and action, and harmonize each with divine order. So you've already, from the first principle, you've established and recognized the divine order of creation, the balance in male and female. You recognize that, and that begins to balance your very thought process as an Afurakani Obarima. Once you recognize that balance from the great mother and great father, the creator and the creatress, the forces in nature, within your body, within your spirit, the balance in all those areas, you can recognize that. Then you learn to establish that balance in every aspect of your life, whether it's through your diet, whether it's through your activity of work and rest and so forth, your interaction with people in your family, in your community, those people who are actually connected to you in a harmonious way, through your emotions, balancing your emotional expressions, balancing your mental output, focusing on things that are productive and harmonious and rejecting those things that are perverse and self-destructive. And then you engage in a collective establishing of that order, the divine balance of male and female through the nation building process. The third principle, we deal with arming ourselves to defend that order and balance that we just established. We recognize the order, we establish that balance, and now we have to arm ourselves in order to defend that balance. Now that you have a nation, a balanced nation, a society that you're working on developing, now you must continuously respect or review every thought, intention, and action, and harmonize each with divine order in order to continue the gears of the nation moving and continue functioning as an Obarima, as a mature Afurakani man. You can't just get a set of principles, memorize them, but then don't act on them. Every thought, every intention, every action must be measured against the standard of divine order. You must continuously, as a man for the rest of your life, respect. When we talk about respect from the Afurakani perspective, the root spect means to look, to see, to perceive. So to respect is to re-look or to review. When you respect something, you re-look or review something. So to respect or review every thought, every intention, and every action, and then harmonize those with divine order, the divine order that you recognize in the first principle, the foundation of everything. Once you recognize that, that's the standard. Now you must respect or review all your thoughts, intentions, and actions and harmonize them with divine order. So if they are out of order, then as a man, as an Obarima, as an Afurakani Obarima, you must harmonize every thought, intention, and action with order, or else you're not functioning as a man. You create disorder in the process. So in that section, we have what is called Nyansapo, which means the wisdom knot. It's an Adinkra symbol from Akhan culture, but the Nyansapo is the name of our decision-making process. It's a 7-step decision-making process. Once people learn the process, they can move through it mentally within seconds. But it's a 7-step decision-making process. Again, it's based on the superstructure of the Abosom, who govern the 7 days of the week, and the solar, lunar, and planetary bodies that govern the 7 days, and so forth. But it's based on recognizing yourself as an Afurakani person who's about to make a certain decision. Recognize who you are. That's the first principle. The second principle is, focus on the situation and how it relates to you as an Afurakani person. If you have a decision to make, what direction you're going to go in, something that you're about to engage in, first you have to recognize yourself as an Afurakani person, and in our sense, an Afurakani male, an Afurakani person. Establishing your identity first. Now, as an Afurakani person, as an Afurakani Obarima man, now how does this situation relate to me as an Afurakani man? Then we can make a decision. Once you assess that, then you can move forward and make that ultimate decision based on what is in harmony with what's right, what's true, what's in harmony with divine order. So first you identify yourself. Some people say, well, it doesn't matter who you are, a decision is a decision. But there are differences between us and all other people, whether it's physiological, what we put in our bodies, or spiritual, the way we approach the world, the way we approach any situation. There are differences between Afurakani people, the influence we have from our ancestresses and ancestors, the Nsamafo, the influence that we have from the Abosom, the forces in nature that are around us, that we're dependent on physically, but also spiritually, and how we need to move forward in the world. We are Afurakani people, so we need to recognize that first before we make any decision. And once we recognize that, then the second piece is, how does this situation relate to us as an Afurakani person. Then you can make that ultimate decision rooted in the knowledge of what is right. Now, the third piece is what is required in order to make that decision, to carry out that decision. What resources do you need in order to carry out that decision, whether it's physical or spiritual, emotional, and so forth. And once you recognize that, then you act. You engage in the activity. The next piece is to keep focus on the validity of your decision. Sometimes people, when you act, people, try to sway you from your action, and you may, recoil from it and try to change your mind and so forth. But it's important, once you've established who you are, how this situation relates to you as an Afurakani person, you made that ultimate decision based on what is correct, what is right, in harmony with divine order. You recognize what is required in order to carry that decision out. Then you acted, and you you engaged in the behavior. You acted on your decision. Now you have to keep focus on the validity of the decision that you made, the actions that you engaged in. The validity is based on your knowledge of who you are, how it relates to you, and that knowledge of what is correct. And then the final piece is to attest to the validity of that decision. You're able to testify or attest to the validity of it based on your knowledge of who you are, how you function, how you should be functioning in the world, how that situation relates to you, and how it came out. So we can go through that 7-step decision-making process in any situation. And when people learn that, it's very quick, and they begin to make decisions, sound decisions, and each one of the 7 steps is governed by the abosom that governs that day of the week, but also specifically that planetary, solar, lunar, or planetary body. But since they're connected to our various organs and the divisions of our spirit, now you have these major abosom contributing to your 7-step decision-making process. Now it's a holistic process. It's the same thing with the 7 principal values of manhood. The abosom that govern the cycle that governs our entire world, they actually contribute to each one of the 7 aspects of your manhood. They give their input. So you attune to them on a consistent basis. And since they govern the 7 days as well, every day you have a specific principle you can focus on to realign with as an Afurakani Obarima. And that's for the rest of your life. So that 7-step decision-making process allows us to make decisions to continuously respect, review every thought, intention, and action, and harmonize it with divine order, or harmonize them with divine order. That's consistency. And so you avail yourself of being able to function in the world on a consistent basis. You already understand that order, the divine order, the balance of male and female. You've established it in every aspect of your life. You're defending it, and you established a nation based on that. So the continuity of the nation will depend on you constantly respecting or reviewing thoughts, intentions, and actions, and harmonizing them with divine order. The continuity of you functioning as an Afurakani Obarima and not slipping into self-destructive, foolish, immature behavior is to constantly review your thoughts, intentions, and actions. How did I treat this particular Afurakani woman the other day? How did I treat this Afurakani child the other day? Let me respect or review my thoughts, intentions, and actions. Not just the actions, but the thoughts and the intentions. With the thoughts, me realigning with divine order, the balance of male and female, and then moving forward, making my intentions pure and my actions noble and intelligent. Were my thoughts perverted by being attached to the white culture, Eurocentric culture, the culture of disorder, lust, malice, and so forth, and then we engage in some self-destructive behavior, and then we begin to rationalize foolish behavior and try to promote it as normal or natural. But when we engage in that continuous respecting or reviewing thoughts, intentions, and actions, and harmonizing them with divine order, then we can continue functioning as an Obarima, an Afurakani man. Okay, so the next piece, exercise proper insight in order to make proper decisions or judgments in life, now you achieve individual manhood. There are a couple of pieces with this, and the book is very straightforward, but that what we call nhumu, or insight, or hu in Akhan culture means knowledge. Hu means to see or to perceive. Ohu means knowledge. Nhumu means to see within. That's insight. So we exercise our insight, proper insight, in order to make proper judgments in life, and therefore we achieve individual manhood. So up to this point, you've learned the balance of male and female. That's the divine order. You've established that balance in every aspect of your existence. You armed yourself to defend that balance with your life, and now you're continuously respecting and reviewing every thought, every intention, every action, and harmonizing each with divine order, so you can function as an Afurakani Obarima continuously, not just one day, but it allows you to, lubricate the gears, and you constantly function as an Afurakani Obarima. However, there are some situations that have that arise that need solutions where there is no precedent that has been set to establish what the solution is going to be. Now you have to learn how to exercise proper insight through your divine consciousness, through your Okraa, through your soul, insight in order to make proper judgments so you can solve and overcome obstacles that have no precedent. As a man, you have to be able to anticipate certain things, engage in preventive measures as well as interventions, but at first, preventive measures or attuning to using your insight to be able to attune to certain problems, structural problems. How do we address this when there has been no precedent set to overcome this obstacle? As well as there may be some obstacles that have been lingering since the previous generation that nobody was able to solve. And it is incumbent upon you as an Afurakani Obarima to bring forward information that can solve those problems that went unsolved in the previous generations that continue to create disorder within the community. So you have to be able to exercise nhumu, proper insight, so that you can make proper judgments in life. You can solve new problems that confront you that have no precedent for solutions, for resolution. You have to be able to craft a resolution, engage in revolution and resolution, but craft solutions that are in harmony with divine order that you can use as a template to show other people how to, embrace those issues. So in the previous principle, you respect every or review every thought, intention, and action, and harmonize them with divine order based on the information you have been given, based on the information you've been given by your Nsamanfo, laid out by your ancestresses and ancestors, laid out by your elders and eldresses, people in the community who have been successful and living in harmony with divine order, based on the precedents that have been set. As long as you review or respect every thought, intention, and action based on that model, then you can continue as an Afurakani Obarima. But at some point you will confront issues, or you'll be confronted with issues that have no precedent. How do you address those? Who do you go to at that point? You have to learn how to attune yourself to your Okraa, your soul, your divine consciousness, which is a divinity. The Ka in ancient Kemet, the Okraa in Akhan culture, the Senido in Vodun, the Ori Inu in Yoruba. It is a divinity, your own personal divinity that dwells within your head. Just like you have a body and a brain that regulates the functions of the body, you have a spirit, and then you have an entity, the spirit's brain, which is the Okraa. It regulates the functions of the body harmoniously. It is a deity, it is your personal aboson sent by Inyame to dwell with you in your head region for the entirety of your life, for you to align yourself with. That's the crux of spirituality, is alignment and realignment with your personal divinity in your head. And that divinity is connected to the other forces in nature. The other forces in nature are the colleagues of that divinity that dwells within you. So that divinity is connected to the abosom who operate through the sun, moon, Ochin Unsoroma, the planets, and every aspect of the created universe. So you have to learn how to attune yourself to that divinity within you, that abosom within you, that orisha within you, so you can make proper judgments, overcome new obstacles that you've been confronted with, as well as address old problems that have been dragging the nation down or haven't allowed us to move forward, that have kept us stagnant. And of course, in our situation in America, in the West, wherever we have been oppressed, and we're breaking free from that, engage in revolution and resolution, we have to use our nhumu, our insight, in order to break free from that, because these are problems that have not been solved. Then there will be new problems, whether it's technological, different forms of warfare that the whites and their offspring are fashioning right now, that we must confront, and we have to utilize our insight in order to confront them. We also give an example of using your insight to attune intuitively to your unsamafo, to the abosom, and so forth, to, in a preventative measure, things that you may anticipate spiritually. You can find out something that's about to happen. Your intuition, your abosom, your nhumu tells you to avoid this situation, avoid this area. You need to learn how to listen to your abosom, listen to your nhumu, so you can avoid situations before they can fully develop. We give an example of a book in the book about somebody intuitively being told, don't walk down a certain block, and they follow their nhumu, their intuition, which is the eye of the crowd, the eye of the soul. Their crowds leading them away from that. Their unsamanfo are leading them away from that, and they decide they're not going to walk down that block. Then they find out later that people were murdered on that block at that particular time. So if they had went down that block, they would have gotten caught up in that negative situation. But their nhumu allowed them to reroute. It was a preventative measure. You have to also use your nhumu for interventions when we find ourselves in negative situations. The community finds itself in negative situations. How do we address these in harmony with order to rectify problems, engage in a revolutionary and a resolutionary process? Intelligence is based on revolution and resolution. Those are the two poles of intelligence, of inyansa, of wisdom. To revolt is to return. Volve means to turn, revolt, or revolution. When the earth moves around the sun and comes back to its point of origin, it's made a complete revolution. So to revolt is to return to an origin, return to your origins. To resolve resolution is to bring a solution to a specific issue. So we return to our source of origin, return to our ancestral culture, we get nourished, we get fed, we get information, and then that's the first aspect, first pole of intelligence, to return so we can get nourishment. Then we use that nourishment, that information, that power to resolve or bring resolution to an issue. So that's the contractive pole of intelligence, or inyansa, is resolution. The expansive pole is revolution. Revolution and resolution are two halves of a whole. So that's the piece dealing with exercising your nhumu, proper insight, so you can make proper judgments in life. The number one way that the whites and their offspring have kept us away from, conditioned us away from making proper judgments, controlling the mind and keeping us away from our nhumu spiritually, so we can't make proper judgments, is to corrupt the ancestral religion. So this is where you get the origin of Christianity, Islam, Hinduism, Judaism, Hebrewism, Moorishism, Kabbalism, Gnosticism, Taoism, Buddhism, all these false traditions. When you exercise proper insight, nhumu, you attune to truth, which we call nokware in the Akhan culture. When you attune to truth, you reject disorder. You understand divine order, inyamewa, inyamen, sheshe, divine law and divine hate. Love and law is the same word in our culture. To be in love is to be in law with something, to be in harmony with respect to divine order when you're dealing with that individual or entity. Hate is the rejection of disorder. Law or love is the acceptance of order. So our culture is based on the acceptance of order and the rejection of disorder. is based on law, which is the expression of order, and hate, which is the impression of order. Through law is an instrument that we use to balance our lives. Love is the instrument through which we attract balance to our lives, our complement, our balance. Law and love is the same concept in Afurakani culture. The term for love in ancient Kemet is meh. The term for law in ancient Kemet is also pronounced meh in the Coptic dialect. So meh meaning law and meh meaning love is the same concept. You find the same thing in the Akhan language. Law and love is the same concept. Law attracts balance, is an instrument to establish balance in your life. Hate is what we use to imprint balance. So through law we express order. Laws talk about the expression of order. If somebody said put something in alphabetical order, then there are laws that express that order. B comes after A, C comes after B, and so forth. So those are the laws that are the expression of order. So law is the expression of order. Hate is the impression of order. So through hate or rejection, we impress or imprint upon something the created order. So your immune system is the vehicle of hate, or what we call chi, in your body. It's the impression of order. It imprints the order, so it rejects the disorder and it establishes, stamps the divine order into your system. And when it stamps the divine order or imprints the divine order into your system, it crushes everything else that is outside of the order. So law is the expression of order, hate is the impression of order. Your immune system hates or rejects toxins, cancerous cells, and so forth. It hates, rejects, kills, destroys in order to maintain the integrity of your system. So when we understand divine order is composed of law and hate, or love and hate, the expression of order and the impression of order, that is the foundation of truth. When you exercise proper insight, you reject or you hate disorder, falsehood, and you only incorporate truth. When you exercise proper insight, attuning to your Okraa, attuning to your Ka, your Inu, your divine consciousness, then you must reject all forms of pseudo-religion. Our religious practices are the means by which we align ourselves with divine order through the agency of the Abosom, the deities, and the Nanonoman Samafo, the honored or spiritually cultivated ancestresses and ancestors. The whites and their offspring want us to worship them. They don't want us to listen to the Supreme Being, the Great Mother and Great Father. They don't want us to listen to the Creator and the Creatress. They don't want us to listen to the deities. They don't want us to listen to the Nanonoman Samafo. Because if we listen to them, then we will be instructed to exterminate them and not embrace them. And they can engage in their cancerous activities, their parasitic activities, if we're focused on exterminating them and rejecting all overtures, whether they're cultural or physical, from them. They understood that they couldn't, after thousands of years of trying, they could not crush or destroy the ancestral religion. So they had to figure out a way to get us to reject listening to the Nsamafo, listening to the Abosom. They wanted us to worship them. So they began to put their images in temples and shrines and so forth. If they were invading ancient Kemet, which they did by the time the Assyrians, Persians, Greeks, Romans, and then Arabs and later Europeans, other Western Europeans, were able to take over northern Kemet because of our infighting, our disintegration, and them playing both sides of the conflict. They began to place their images in the temples. They began to destroy our images over hundreds of years. This didn't happen within a year or two. It didn't happen in 100 years. It took centuries, over 1,000 years, before they could actually force these false religions on our people, corruptions of our traditional practices. They had to look for people who were disgruntled, who would ally with them, who didn't care about tradition, criminals in the society, to ally with them and help them promote these false traditions. They manufactured the character Jesus, Yeshua ben Pandera, Muhammad, Bilal, Moses, Abraham, Isaac, Ishmael, Solomon, Sheba, Menelik, Buddha, Allah, Yahweh, Brahman. All of these characters are fictional. They never existed. The scriptures are fictional. The practices are fictional. They are not rooted in ancient Afurakani culture. They are perversions of true culture. They are perversions of fragments of culture. None of the writings are sacred that they promote or propound. None of them are authentic. They're pure foolishness. So we have certain information in the book in that particular chapter where we go into detail showing some of the deities from ancient Kemet that they stole descriptive titles from or just corrupted their general titles and used them to manufacture these other fake characters and these fake traditions. But then we have links where we have information like the Kuku Tumtum, the ancestral jurisdiction, where we go into detail showing Jesus never existed, Moses never existed, Abraham, Isaac, Ishmael, all these various characters, how they were manufactured, when they were manufactured, how they were manufactured off of the names and descriptive titles and functions of other deities, actual divinities in nature. And they tried to carnalize them and make them Europeans, and then some people decided to blacken some of them up and try to say that these were black people living in the so-called Middle East, just to try to capture some of our people and have us to engage in false traditions. So this is where you get the blackened versions of these false traditions. So you have brainwashed black people who are calling themselves Hebrews, brainwashed black people who call themselves Moors, brainwashed black people who call themselves Gnostic Christians, brainwashed black people who call themselves Sufis or engage in esoteric Islam or esoteric Christianity, all kinds of foolishness, lost landism, talking about Mu and Atlantis and these fictional abodes that never existed, that they get directly from the whites and their offspring. And when we say the whites and their offspring, we're talking about people who publish. We're also talking about those whites who perverted the cultures when they invaded, those black people who united with those whites, those people who died. Some people are still evoking these deceased crackers and calling them ancestors, and these crackers are telling them, oh yes, you come from the land of Mu. Oh yes, you come from the land of Atlantis. Oh, black people didn't come from Africa, they came from the land of Mu, they came from Asia, came from ancient America. All kinds of foolishness when you don't have proper insight, when you don't have an authentic religious practice, you're not engaged in authentic Afurakani ancestral religion, you're not really in attunement with the Abosom, you're not really in attunement with the Orisha, you're not really in attunement with the Nananoman, Samanfo, the Egungun, the Aku, the Akutu, the Ntoru, Ntortu. Now you're dealing with discarnate, wayward spirits of slave masters as well as brainwashed blacks who are engaged in foolishness, and they will tell you anything that supports their own lust, supports their own malice. So if you don't have that insight and you can't attune to your Okraa, then you can't attune to truth, and then you can't embrace law and hate, and then you're engaged in self-destructive activity. But when you activate that Nhumu, that insight, then you embrace divine law and divine hate fully, Maranet Chi fully. You embrace Nyansa, wisdom, revolution, and resolution fully, and now you've achieved individual manhood. You have now achieved that kind of independence of thought and action that allows you to move forward on a consistent basis as an Afurakani Obarima, as an individual. Now we talk about individual because the next piece talks about participating in the divine order of creation fully through uniting with the Afurakani female, who is your balance. When you're fully developed as an Afurakani Obarima, an Afurakani man, that means you're a fully developed half of a whole. The other half is the Afurakani Oba, which is the female. And when she develops herself, she's a fully developed half. And then the two halves come together to make, of course, the whole. Only the Afurakani man and Afurakani woman, of course, the Obarima and Oba, balance each other out. There's no such thing as non-Afurakani, non-Afurakani individuals Asians, pseudo-Native Americans who are just Asians, white Asians, Arabs, Hindus, Europeans, Americans, white Hispanics, white Latinos, and so forth. None of those individuals have an Okraa. All of them are spirits of disorder. They incarnate as spirits of disorder. They are not our balance. They are perversion. They have nothing to do with us. You are not naturally attracted to spirits of disorder. Spirits of disorder are naturally repulsive to the Afurakani Obarima and the Afurakani Oba, the Afurakani female, and the Afurakani male. This is part of the repulsion. If you have a large magnet on a table and you have a smaller magnet and you place the like polarities together, it will repel instantly. The smaller magnet will be repelled every time. There's never a time that the larger magnet will decide, this time I'm not going to repel. Based on nature, based on the laws of nature, it's going to repel every time. Because of the nature of the whites and their offspring, non-Afurakanu, non-Afurakaitnu, they are repulsive to and repulsed by spirits of order. As long as you have a Kra in your head, as long as you have an Ori, a Ka, a Selido, then you are a spirit of order. The only human beings that have a Kra are Afurakani, Afurakaitnu people, so we are spirits of order. When we get out of alignment with the Kra, then we engage in self-destructive, foolish behavior, and we suffer the consequences. But as long as we get back in alignment with it, we can function in a harmonious manner. We are spirits of order by nature. The whites and their offspring, what defines them as the whites and their offspring is that they don't have the Kra. They don't have the Ka. They don't have the Ori. Inu, they don't have the Selido. Because of their activity, they repelled that thousands of years ago, and that disconnected from them a very long time ago. And their spirits, they are spirits. They're like bodies without a brain. They are spirits without the spirit brain. They are self-destructive, perverse entities. Their disorder manifests on a regular basis. When you develop your Nhumu, you will be able to attune to the spirits of the whites and their offspring, and you will be able to experience their disorder even before they open their mouths. You will experience it with a newborn as well as an older person, because their spirits, just by virtue of the fact that they are living and breathing, the energy circulating through them on a consistent basis is a manifestation of disordered energy, disordered emanations, exudations, and so forth. They are spirits without Kra, so they are repulsive. And just like the only way you can force those two magnets together with the polarities that are like, you would have to force the magnets together and hold them, because as soon as you let go, there's an automatic repulsion. The only way Afurakani Obarima unites with a non-Afurakaitni woman is if it's forced, because naturally it would not happen. You're naturally repulsed by them, and you naturally repel them. That's a function of divine hate, rejection of disorder, rejection of perversity. So we don't engage in any kind of activity. You cannot be balanced out by a non-Afurakaitni female. There's no such thing. You're going against natural order. Only the Afurakani male and Afurakani female balance one another out. There's also no such thing as balance between two Afurakani males or Afurakani females. Dissexuality is insanity. It's perversity. It's no different than bestiality. It's no different than pedophilia. It's sexual deviance, and it's perverse. The Abosom, the Orisha, the Vodou, Amen, Amenet, Nyamewa, Nyame, hate dissexuality. We call it dissexuality because it's saying dis, meaning just like disorder. Sexuality is really not present. It's not happening. It's disorder. It's perverse. No matter what the whites and their offspring attempt to teach us and force on us, they're just simply expressing who they are. That's their nature. That's their ill nature. They've been promoting dissexuality for thousands of years. They tried to promote it in ancient Kemet. They've tried to promote it everywhere they've come in contact with us. So the fact that one of the whites and their offspring, or all of the whites and their offspring, are embracing and forcing this sexuality openly, trying to force it on society in this country, meaning black people in this country, they're trying to force it on us because, of course, it's already a part of their culture and their ill nature. They try to force it on Afurakani in the Caribbean, wherever black people are. They're trying to force this sexuality. Obama, who's descendant of a white female, he incarnated through the white line. He's a spirit of disorder. He's not one of us. He's one of them. He's one of those criminals. He's one of those spiritual, perverse entities, and he manifests that on a regular basis. Of course, he would call a faggot who comes out in the NBA and says, I'm a faggot, so he gets on the phone in the midst of anything else he could possibly be doing. He has to stop that to get on the phone and call a faggot and congratulate the faggot for coming out and saying, I'm a faggot. The reason why they would do that is because he wants your sons to be faggots. Obama wants your sons to grow up trying to screw each other. He wants your sons to destabilize the entire community. He wants your daughters to be lesbians. They promote lesbianism, promote faggotry, because that's one of the major ways to destabilize an entire community. That's the major way to bring perversity into the community. If you use the procreative power that creates children, a portion of that is from the procreative power of the universe of Ra and Ra'ed. And since we're directly connected to Ra and Ra'ed, if we use that force to try to engage in perversity like this sexuality, that corrupts our own bodies, that corrupts our spirits, that creates disorder in the community long term. So that's the goal of the whites and their offspring. When we talked about them waging war against us with metal armaments, chemical and biological warfare, intellectual warfare, social warfare, and so forth, this is one of the major social forms of psychological, spiritual warfare that they engage in. It's not just drugs, it's not just dropping bombs, it's not just drones, it's not just the U.S. African, it's not just that, it's not just the military, but they use cultural warfare, they use psychological warfare, they use spiritual, quote-unquote, warfare, meaning fake religions, false philosophies, and dissexuality is a number one tool for them. When we understand our culture, our Nhumu, we understand that dissexuality is perverse, is no different than bestiality or pedophilia. In our culture, those activities were always sanctioned. Specifically, the response to them was execution. If you engage in that, you get executed. That's been our culture for thousands of years before the whites and their offspring came into power in different parts of the continent. Some Negroes would try to tell you that in our ancient cultures we didn't have any sanctions against this sexuality, and that only came into being when we became Christians and Muslims and so forth, and that's part of a patriarchal culture. That's pure foolishness. We always, whenever that came up, our culture was structured in a fashion where we would execute those individuals. Any sexual deviance, whether it was dissexuality, pedophilia, bestiality, whatever it is, perverting the life force, procreative force for perverse, malicious, or lustful purposes is going against life itself. And if you're going against life, then you will be taken out of this life by the community. So that's always been our practice. So the balance of male and female is primary. When you achieve individual manhood in the previous piece, in the previous principle, now once you unite with the Afurakani female, who is your balance, now you can bring ancestresses and ancestors back into the world in a harmonious environment. And there's much more to that with regard to the ramifications of that, but that's part of the piece. And then the last principle is, it talks about you can only function as an Afurakani Obarima through your own cultural context. You can't function as an Afurakani man, and we talked about this at the very beginning, It's not just that you're a defender, a protector, a provider, and a builder, but based on what cultural orientation. What does it mean? What are you protecting? What are you building? And what are you providing for? If you think that just any material wealth makes you a man, then you'll just be a criminal and just generate a great deal of revenue, and then you consider yourself a man. Culturally, our way of life, our culture or way of life, is based on divine order. The forces in nature that govern us determine what's harmonious in this universe, and that's seated within our Okraa, encoded within our Okraa. So, based on the culture we come from, the manner in which we harmonize with divine order is unique. All Afurakani people harmonize with order, the same divine order, but there may be certain ways that we do so. We have certain languages, we have certain ritual practices, certain kinds of clothing, certain kinds of foods. Some people are allergic to certain foods and they will break out because they eat mushrooms or certain other kinds of foods, whereas somebody else in another group, they can eat those foods all day and they don't have any allergic reactions. We even have that in our families. So depending on what your culture is, how you came into being, what your descent is, what your blood circle is, matricircular and patricircular, what your people have been through, how you have crafted culture, and your specific approach to divine order, which they're all very similar across the board. Afurakani people all over the continent, as well as our people over here who have maintained culture, reignited culture. We've reconnected with the Abosom from our blood circles right here in America, in the West, reconnected with our Nsamanfo based on our interaction with them. So we have been able to reestablish culture even though we've been cut off from the continent. We have different means of harmonizing with divine order, but we're all harmonizing with the same divine order. But we must do so through our specific Afurakani cultural context. When you come into the world, you have a specific Nkrabiya and Nkra, specific function to execute in the world that is encoded within your Kra, with your soul, by Inyame wa Inyame. You're assigned to a certain abosom to carry out those functions, to wield certain kinds of power, so you can function as a cell within the great divine body of the Supreme Being. Just like every cell in your body supports a certain organ and every organ supports the entire body, you're a cell within the body of the Supreme Being. You're a cell within one of the organs or one of the deities within the great divine body. So you support that deity's functioning. You may be a child of Bena, Abena, Awusi, Ajua, Yao, Ya, Abba, whoever it is. You may be a child of that, one of those Abosom. You carry their energy. When you support that Abosom's energy, you support the whole. But there's a specific means by which you must support that energy based on your ancestry and how your people dealt with that divinity, incorporated that into their blood circle, passed that on through their DNA, and now your DNA resonates at a certain frequency. So when you harmonize with that deity, you say certain kinds of prayers, engage in certain kinds of dances, wear certain colors on certain days, and so forth, all based on your specific cultural context. And we find out about that through our connection with the Nsamanfo, through our ancestral shrines, and so forth. So that's a summary of Obarima Afurakani Manhood. 7 principal values. Each one is governed by the Abosom that governs the 7-day week, with the solar, lunar, and planetary bodies that govern that cycle, which actually governs the cycle of our planet. Also our chronobiological cycle, the circa-septan cycle, they govern that cycle. They govern our various organs and organ systems. When we attune to those 7 principles, recognize them, internalize them, demonstrate them through thought, intention, and action, now we can function as Obarima. So now we have the book published. Again, the PDF is a free download. We have the softcover version on the website. We have the link there. Anybody have any questions? You can type in a question. You can hit us up on, let me give you some links right quick. Okay. Okay, so I gave you 3 pieces. The Afurakani.ning.com site is our own network, similar to Facebook in a sense, but it's a Ning network. People who are studying the same kind of information. You can join the site, develop a profile. We have forum discussions. We post videos, post articles, post a number of different things, all pertaining to our culture. That's the email address, Akwamuman at Odwirafo.com, that you can hit us up at. We also have a website outside of our regular Odwirafo website, Odwirafo.com. We also have Sankofajuma.com. With Sankofajuma, we teach human service professionals, Afurakani, therapists, social workers, psychologists, community support workers, and so forth, people who work in the community. We show them how to incorporate culture when developing individual treatment plans so they can communicate, enhance outcomes with their consumers, with their clients. And so there's a piece. So we have a journal, Akwamu, the whole life journal that we publish for that. But then people can you can purchase the Akwamu whole life journal. It is a journal dealing with various aspects of the culture in an introductory fashion. Holistic health, melanin, true story, some Adinkra symbols, true historical information about ancient Kemet, values, positive inherited values from our culture, and so forth. So that's all in the first issue, and you can get to that journal. There's a PDF version as well as a softcover version. You can get to that journal through Sankofajuma. We're also on Facebook, of course, Afurayat. And if anybody have any questions before we go? Okay. If you have any questions, just send us an email. We do conduct the Obarima Afurakani Manhood workshop. Just hit us up if you want to, schedule one in your area, in your city, in your state. We can do that. And then we also do presentations as well on the various other aspects of our publications, whether it's ancestral religion and culture, nation building. We're going to be doing some more information videos coming up, for example, on divination and things like that. So just give us a shout, hit us up on the email, on the Akwamuman at Odwirafo.com email if you have any questions. And that's it. So Medase for checking us out. You can hit us up anytime on Facebook. And we'll be posting this video up on our YouTube channel. Let me just give you the YouTube channel right quick. We have a number of videos on the YouTube channel already. Okay, so it's youtube.com/Odwirafo. So Medase for checking the video out, and we will be updating everybody on the next presentation that should be coming up within the next couple of weeks. All right, Medase.